We'll be back in Galatians chapter 5. Turn me down just a little bit, please. And Brother Stephen, since you're standing up, open us in a word of prayer, please.
Thank you for taking care of us and for giving us the health. Thank you that you're in control of everything. God, I pray that you just bless all the services through the day and give Brother Jeremy the words to say. I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
We'll be back in Galatians chapter 5. And I will say this. I understand why many aren't here. Have to make a personal decision. But if you're at home and you're listening to this, I would say of all the lessons we've had in Galatians so far, this is one of the pivotal. If there is one lesson I would want to make sure everyone listen to, this is it. So if you could text somebody or nudge them, I really do think this is fundamental in Christian living. Last week we read in Galatians chapter 5 that the key to consistency, living a life of love and joy and peace, was to live in the Spirit. Now, we've gone over this multiple times. To Paul, a legalistic Christian makes about as much sense as a carnal Christian. Neither one of them makes sense. He calls Christians to be free from sin, not to be free, not to be bound in sin, not to be bound in the law, but free. And that brings to the question of, okay, well, if they're not bound in sin and you're not bound in law, how do you do this? Lorraine, if you take away the restraint of law, how do we know what not to do and what? And that is the question he began to answer last week. There is no but. The answer is the restrainer is no longer on the outside. It's no longer external. It's no longer legal. But the restrainer now is on the inside. He is internal. You are the temple of God. He does reside inside of you. That is where power and holiness and glory comes from. It comes from the inside of you. Be who you are. And so let's pick back up where we left off last week, Galatians chapter 5. We'll begin reading in verse 13. I think it gives good context. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. You've been called for freedom. Only use not that liberty for an occasion to the flesh. This is not the carnal Christian, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this. Pause, make sure you pay attention. All the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. Where we started. This I say then. Boom. You want the restrainer? You want the how? This I say, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth after the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that ye would. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulation. We're usually okay when we go through that. Doug, we go through that and he'll say, whew. But then it goes wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murderers. Okay, I'm back to being safe again. Unless we read Matthew chapter 5, where it says when we get angry at our brother, murderers, drunkenness, revelings. And if you miss anything, this is one of those great cover everything clauses, and such like, which means, and everything else that fits into these categories. I'm not going to take time to list them all, which I tell you before, as I have told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. But, contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. Paul says, there is a way to live real, restrained Christian life. And that way is to walk in the Spirit. Now, we said we can break this passage up into 4 areas. First, there's a command. Then there's conflict. Then there is the contrast, which we probably won't get to till next week. And then there is the conquest. The command. Notice when you go through here, there's only one command. Brother Moyer, always good to see you, and I really do mean that. But there's only one command. It's imperative. The imperative is that you walk in the Spirit. It does not give you an imperative that you be meek. It doesn't give you imperative that you don't. It gives you one imperative. If you will walk in the Spirit, love, joy, peace will be the product. If you will walk in the Spirit, all of the don'ts won't happen. You won't be in the flesh. There is one command in this whole passage. To jump around and concentrate on any of those other things, you've got to be careful, because they are the product. They are not the action we make happen. They are the product that God makes happen when we do one thing. The only command in this passage, it boils down to that passage in Corinthians 6 that we read last week. Do we honestly believe that we are the temple? The Christianity is not about hand in the hand of the man and walk together. Okay, Brother Wayne, we don't have to put our hand in the hand and walk with him. He abides inside. It is internal. But all through this chapter, through this book, it warns us again and again and again, we can make Christ of no effect. Because we can do it in our own power. And it begins to call us over and over. So we went through that last week. We get to the place, Brother Andy, where, all right, so all of that is true. Well, then the question is, why don't I feel and walk and dwell? Why is this living in the Spirit thing, why is it just not natural? You know, I hear all the time things like, be who you are. Why is it not natural for me to be who I am? Well, talked about two reasons. One, you're Ishmael, not an Isaac. You are not saved, because if you are, Brother Roy, the Spirit resides within you. Or number two, you are an Isaac. You are saved. You're truly a Christian, but you have learned to live life with a list of rules and codes and do's and don'ts. And every day, that is what you fight for. And that is what you wake up and say, I must do or I must not do. That is what determines my value. To me, that list, that code, that is my life. And in so doing, I have turned off walking in the Spirit. I'm walking in the flesh, doing better things. But Brother Allen, it's still just as limited and just as frustrating and just as empty. It still does not have the power. So, for a little more help to understand, we spent some time trying to look at this idea of the Spirit. Let's look at the contrast. Let's look at the negative. Oftentimes that's helpful. For this I say then, walk in the Spirit. Do, here's the don't, here's the negative, and don't walk in the flesh, because if you walk in the Spirit, you won't fulfill the desires of the flesh. If you do one, you won't do the other. So, Stephen, here we go. Ready? Rhetorical. Please don't answer. Don't take up all my time. I know you just like to talk, but don't do that. What is meant by the flesh? Okay. Ooh. It's talking about the body. Okay, no, I'm not going to, maybe. It's talking about that which sins. You know, it's the thing that makes you do the bad deed. That's the flesh. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that either. But this is important. This walking by the Spirit thing is crucial to me. So let's get something more than just, my answer. I'm going to try to smooth the teacher on the test. Let's go Scripture. Romans 6:19. Eric, did you get that for me? Romans 6:19. Oh, you did. I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. So I get a couple things here about the flesh. I know one thing the flesh is weak, the flesh is sickly. Okay? So, Doug, the flesh is weak and the flesh is sickly. Let me see if I can learn anything else about the flesh. Romans chapter 7, verse 18. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. So the flesh is weak, the flesh has nothing good in it, and the flesh is prone to sin. Okay, I'm getting it, but still learning that. Key for me, because I'm kind of a slow learner, is go back to Romans chapter 7, verse 5. For when we were in the flesh, now we know Romans 7 is Paul illustrating this exact picture. The things I want to do, those I don't. The things I don't, and he's going through this. And he starts it actually in the beginning in Romans 7, for when we were in the flesh. Brother Roy starts to help. It's like my brain goes ding. The flesh is a time before I was walking with God. The flesh is a time when I was living in the natural. The flesh is when all I had in life, all I knew. Why would anyone live in the flesh? Because all I have is the flesh. I have no supernatural. I have no new heart. I have no spirit residing within me. All I have is what I can see, what I can do, what I can touch, what I can accomplish, what I can make happen, what I can strive, what I can limit, what I can discipline, what I can possess or achieve. So Paul said there was a time before we were with Christ. There was a time before the supernatural. There was a time before the Spirit came to abide within me where all I could do was what I could do, was what I could have, was what I could achieve, what I could perform. And then he goes on to say, if we, now back to verse 16, if we'll walk in the Spirit, we won't fulfill the lust, the desires, lust, epithumia, strong desire. We won't fulfill the desires of the flesh. Okay, I'm starting to get this a little bit. Kent, really? Ready? What is the desire of the flesh? The desire of the flesh is to get me to live in the flesh, where everything that I can see, do, touch, taste, achieve, perform is what is life to me. The desire of the flesh is to get me to define life. Josh, it's to get me to define life by what I can do, by what I can gain. And if I can get to that place, should work, right? Well, problem's twofold. One, if life for me is money or status or position or power or a nice house or a pretty wife or physical beauty, that's not life for me, then I will fear losing it. If life for me is a perfect, big, gorgeous house, as soon as I get it, that thing starts to deteriorate. If life for me is anything outside of seeking His will, I must maintain it. I will fight. I will do anything. I will push, connive, manipulate. Doug, I will live life, right? If life for me is in the flesh, then I will anger, clamor, wrath, because I must live. If life for me is physical beauty, well then I'll spend money, I'll go to the gym, I'll spend time, I'll buy clothes, I'll at any cost. If it's relationship, then I must maintain that relationship. I'll guilt, I'll anger, I'll reward, I'll flirt, I'll do anything I have to maintain that relationship where it is, and I must have control of that. But here's the problem. I said it's twofold. One, immediately life in the flesh becomes anything in the natural. I mean, we have no control of that. It's money. It's money. Doug, it's money. Can you control the stock market? Can you control tragedy? Can you control COVID-19? Please fix that for me. It is out of our control. Stress, strive, pressure, anger, frustration. Does it sound like peace, love, joy, long-suffering, patience? The second thing, let's say we can get, accomplish, possess, have. All right. Those things that are in the natural, they have no power to fulfill. If you could control, if you could get, which I'm telling you, you can't. But if you could, they can't. Either way, we lose. Life in the flesh is frustrating. It's angry. It's upset. It's empty. It's unfulfilling. Here. a couple illustrations, because I'm kind of, Brother Moore, I've heard that my whole life. But the truth is, if I'm not careful, every day I want to live that in my flesh and my control and what I can do, what I can't, my performance. And anytime I do, it's frustrating. So here, first one. Remember Matthew chapter 4? Matthew chapter 4, the temptation of Christ. Christ is in the wilderness for 40 days. 40 days, no eating. 40 nights, no eating. Satan comes to him. He's tempted. He tempts him 3 different ways. The first way, he comes up and he tempts him and he says, if you are God, turn this rock into a stone that you might be filled. Turn this stone into bread that you might be filled. Thanks, Clay. I would have just kept on going if you didn't help me out there. And so, picture this in the flesh. By the way, I've listened to that lots of times. No, we're not going through that passage, but when I used to hear that all the time, preachers used to preach on it all the time. I'm like, okay, I don't see what's the big deal. It's 40 days. Go ahead, turn it into bread. Well, I'll tell you, here's the big deal. It says, turn that stone into bread. If you're God, turn it into bread. You can do it. So, in the flesh, I will not. I will control by my own self-discipline. I will not yield to temptation. Satan, no, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Looks pretty stupid. But sometimes that's like our response. That's even how we tell people they should respond. No, listen to the response. No, the response is not, I'm not going to do it. The response is, life to me is not about bread. What does the Bible say? The Bible says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word. Life to me is not about bread. It's not in the natural. It's not in the now. It's not in the thing. Life to me is in my relationship right here. Saying you don't get it. You're tempting me with something that doesn't tempt me. I don't need the natural. That's not what matters. That is not life. Okay, well, try number 2. If you would just go up to the temple, cast yourself down in the temple, you know what happens. God promises in Psalms that he would send the angels down and that no one's going to touch you. And before your foot hits the ground, boom, the angels are going to save you. And think this through. And all of Israel is going to see this happen because it's from the temple. And they will anoint and everything will happen. And what's the response? Thou shalt not tempt God. Life to me is about fulfilling his will. It's about following the light daily where he shines it. It's not about hurrying things up or doing it my way or accomplishing. Life to me is about following in his will. And what does the Bible say? It says, thou shalt not tempt. So one more time. All right. Let's go up here to this mountain. Woo, look at over all of this like it's his to give. You can have all of this. Just bow down to me. What do you say? Life to me is not about this. Life to me is about worshiping God. You see, it becomes about the inside. When we walk not in the natural, not in the flesh. This is how Christians are supposed to walk. We're supposed to walk in the new nature according to what is in me. That is supposed to become what life is. That's all good. This is where the preacher will stand up here. He stands up here in all authority, and he just looks so good every time he's up here. He likes to hear that he looks good. So you look so good when you're up here. And he'll say, and he'll tell us, congregation which I love, when you look on every billboard, they're calling you to walk in the flesh. When you look and watch TV and every ad, it's talking to you about sensualism and materialism. And if you only had this thing, or if you only had her, or if you only had, life would be better. And we sit out there and say, yes, preacher, the world is deceived. Brother Allen, this book is not written to the world. He's writing this to Christians. He's saying Christians are walking in the flesh according to what they can touch and feel and do and have and accomplish and possess and acquire. Okay, you got better behavior. You look better. But it's in the same power. We got 2 more illustrations. I need to go through these so at least we can get caught up. Because this is abstract. This is hard to understand. Well, maybe not for you, but it's hard for me. Doug, I don't know, a long time ago when I was in my 20s, I went to work at a school in Texas. I wrote some of this down to make me short. If you actually really do want to hear this story, give me like 8 hours and take me out to dinner and breakfast and lunch. We'll just stay there the whole time. But I went and I heard about it Thanksgiving in Indiana, and I went and visited it a week later while I was still on Thanksgiving break. We were living in Gainesville. We were up in Indiana. Singer's bus broke down, and that's where I heard about this church, and it's what I wanted to do. It's what I was about to go to school for. So I had the opportunity now. Seems silly to not at least walk through the door that was open, wait for it to be closed. I went to Texas, interviewed with them. They said, be here before Christmas, and boom, we started to work before Christmas that same year. And we got there, and there was about 30 kids in high school. And let me tell you, this is a rough school. It's like the attitude was rebellious. There was no interest in God. They were lazy. They didn't want to work. They didn't care about grades. There was no effort about growing up or building a life. We're in Texas. There was no even concern about their sports program. It was like, where am I? It was so foreign to me. And so I pulled out the list of what you're supposed to do in these cases, and I didn't know what to do. I don't even know. I'd have to figure out how old I was. I was probably like 23 years old. Maybe younger. I don't think we had any. No, we didn't. Eric was born there, so we didn't have any kids yet. I was younger than that. I'm just some young, dumb, okay, I'm going to do what God says. Oh, I miss those days. Because I didn't know what to do. So I just read, and I listened to everything I could. And I prayed constantly. And I know what changed my heart was the Word of God. So, Doug, I started daily devotions in there. And I don't want anyone else to do them because I thought I could do them. Nope. But I didn't know anybody else, and I knew I would put in the study. And every day, homeroom was my room. And we left from that room. And, I took over the coaching of what sports? Everyone. How do you do that? Well, you have some practices at 6 o'clock in the morning. And you have some practices at 4, and you have some practices at 6 at night. And, we didn't win everything, but they went from not winning a single basketball game for like 3 years to finishing one game under 500. Woo-hoo. And then about 4 years later, how did these things happen? Strange thing happened, Brother Roy. We were now running over 100 in high school, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a big increase. And I'll tell you what had happened is I had 4 kids their junior year, early in that year, test out in the top 10% of the nation in mathematics. Big deal. They had spent $50 to find out they had actually learned something. And, our basketball team, our volleyball team, I don't even remember losing a game for like a year and a half. And we were being invited to tournaments with public schools and 3A schools. And, it was just, they would invite you to the school. Doug, they invite you to the school. They don't really play double elimination very much in Texas. They have a consolation bracket. You know what that means, 1 loss, and all you can do is win the consolation. So what happens is the team that's putting on the tournament, they usually schedule all these smaller teams, and then they put all the tough teams together. So all they really have to do is win 1 game at the end to win first. And even if they lose, they finish second. They never end up in the consolation bracket. Well, we were such a small school, we're getting booked to all these consolation tournaments, smacking the home team in the first game. It was like, I was loving it. And the school was doing so well. And the best part, chapel was amazing. Chapel had gone from one of those things you just have to have, where you just book whoever, so kids wanted to go. I had kids in high school writing songs and saying, can we sing this in chapel? And they were handling the music in chapel. It was truly the greatest part of the week for me. Now, and how did that happen? I don't know how that happened. Okay, because literally all I did is pray and share Bible, and somehow, if I be lifted up, I'll bring all men to me. God changed hearts. I don't know how it happened, but I know it was a whole lot of fun for me. Now, come year 4, Doug, something changed. See, in a Christian life, it became important to me to be Brother Jeremy. Well, actually, in Texas, you're not Brother Jeremy, you're Brother Lorigan. So if you get out of this little circle in the real South, everything's last name. It was really weird for me to come here and Brother Steve, Preacher Barber, Pastor Barber, Brother Barber. But you leave, like these 5 little states, everything's last name. So it was Brother Lorigan, which was really weird when you're like 23, 24 years old. But, so, 15 minutes. But what happened is it became important to me to be Brother Lorigan. When I coach, Doug, hard to believe if you've seen me as a fan, but as a coach, I don't yell at players. I don't yell at referees. I'll call a timeout. I'll walk over to the huddle. This is what we're going to do. And then on the way back, I'll walk by the referee so we can have a little conversation. Okay, it's important to me that those parents look at us and think we know what we're doing. That when they've invested that time for school and for money and for practice, I don't yell. See, appearance matter to me. And when we would bring in people, in Texas, the belt buckle of the Bible belt, when we would bring in people to speak in chapel, it was important to me of what they saw. When kid came to me, it was important to me. When parents looked at me, it was important to me. And it became important for me to be that person. And I began to work and to strive. Brother Allen, life for me became to be Brother Jeremy, Brother Logan. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't even understand that there was a change. I just worked and strived and gave and pushed and we kept winning and things kept, but inside of me. So what made you realize? Well, you had some big thing in your life or a child was born or, no, I'm ashamed to say those things happened, Stephen, and I just kept doing and kept working and kept striving and kept. But then one day, I was reading Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest, and it was just this little blip from Galatians, and it was, I don't even remember what passage, but in there it talked about the thermometer that he gives us. So it must have been referencing something else. Thermometer that he gives us. Oh, the thermometer of, okay, this is what happens if you're in the flesh, and the thermometer of this is what happens if you're in the spirit. Well, my thermometer said work, strive, tired, wore out, anger, manipulation, grouch, power over. It did not say love, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, meekness. Now, I could quickly come to the definition and then start arguing why. There were reasons for the fact that I was the way I was. Except if you read this passage. If you walk in the Spirit, you will not show forth these works of the flesh. And if you walk in the Spirit, the fruits of that walk will be love, joy, peace, gentleness, meekness, temperance. So I could justify it all I want to, and I probably could win an argument with anybody who was going to come and approach me, but I could not win an argument with the Spirit that was inside of me, saying, you have begun to walk in the flesh. I'll give you one more illustration. John MacArthur uses an illustration similar to this when he teaches on Ephesians, when he gets to Ephesians chapter 3. He talks about Ephesians chapter 1 through chapter 3. It's all about Ephesians 1 through 3. Mark this down to make you look smart one day in chapel. Ephesians 1 through 3 is all about who you are as a Christian. I mean, really, he's telling you, this is who you are. And it is amazing and fun and great to read. But then he begins Ephesians chapter 4 with, now that this is who you are, walk worthy of the vocation wherewith you are called. And so when he closes out chapter 3, he says this, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are basically like giving you the keys to the car. But will you start the car? Okay. There's a book called Birthright, and I forget who wrote it right now. I might have written it down. David Needham. And in there he uses an illustration he calls carport Christianity. It's living by battery power. Battery power being my will, what I can control. And it's like good things. And so when I was reading this a long time ago, all I could think of, my dad one time had a 1967 Capri Classic. In fact, my dad always had some old broken down car outside that he was planning on fixing. None of them ever got fixed. It usually got to a place where he would take it apart so he could really do this massive thing. Parts would be everywhere, and sooner or later, the whole thing would get thrown away. But he had this 1967 Caprice Classic. I was like 10, 11 years old. And it was beautiful. It had a 327, and it would actually start, unlike most of the cars that he had. But I wasn't allowed to start it. I could go outside and sit in it. And I would sit in it, and I would just like pretend I was Speed Racer in the Mach 5, and every button would do something different. And I gave like Speed Racer. You ever watch Speed Racer, Mike? It's a great show. I made sure my boys watched Speed Racer. And I'd push a little button, and instead of it being, you know, like his little cutters, it would be a laser. I updated Speed Racer to the 1980s. And I would just sit right there, and I would imagine, and I would do everything in that car. And sometimes I would even take the key out there, and I knew how to turn the ignition backwards so the battery would be on. I could make the windshield wipers work. I could make the turn signals work. I could do a lot of things in that car. But that car did not do what it was designed to do. It never moved. And as Christians, there's lots of times we're living on battery self-will power. We can accomplish a lot of good-looking Christian-type things. But we're not doing what we're designed to do. We're not tapped into ignition power. In fact, now this was an automatic, and I don't even think new standards will do this, but the old standards, it's probably a safety switch unless you put the clutch in it. You can't turn the ignition. Take all the fun out of life. But with an older car, if you didn't put the clutch in, you could turn the ignition, and it would even move you a little bit, right? It would lurch you, and you get scared, and you'd lay off. Or you could just sit right there and hold it and burn up everything underneath the hood, but you could do it, and you could even get it to move. But Doug, sooner or later, that would go, and battery runs out, right? So you know what you do? You come to get your battery charged. But then you walk right out those doors, and you still live on battery power. There are a lot of Christians who are missing ignition. Contact between the act of my will and a surrender, a desire, more than surrender, a desire to be in God's will. You see, his spirit, which is in us, brings these two things together, and when we surrender and we're dependent, there's ignition, there's glory, and there's power, and there's understanding, and there's revelation, and he can do something with us. But that means we got to quit trying to control it ourselves. 8 minutes. Actually, we got to stop a little bit short of that. If it's so simple, why is it so hard to live there? Because I'll tell you, I constantly find myself waking up in the carport, tired and exhausted. I do, Doug. Isn't that a shame? Well, I understand why. Because there's a conflict. For the flesh lusteth against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. There is a conflict. The flesh's function in my life is to get me to gain my value from the things that are natural. It's to get me to operate in the things I can do, achieve, accomplish, possess. It's to get me to depend on those things. And flesh does not whisper. It is everywhere. If I could live there, if I could have her, if I could live this way, if only, put anything you want into that only. If it's outside of surrender to Christ, we have an issue. That battery is going to get run down. There is no power, there is no glory. But if we believe anything will give us life, Doug, we'll spend everything we have to get it. I must live. I must have. I must maintain. I must change through any power and any means necessary. But that will be in vain. Because from the flesh flows the works of the flesh. Strife, seditions. Here. Living. Brother Roy, living on battery power, it's not, oops, I haven't grown up. It's a sin. And it's a sin that is seen. Okay. when I'm full of anger and control and maliciousness, Doug, others see it. Now, I don't want them to, so I label that as leader and control. And remember what I said? Remember what I said? I walked over here and said, you know, one of the biggest challenges to young people walking in the flesh is you and I. If we're not careful, it is you and I. Okay, well, somebody said, well, what are you talking about Doug doing wrong? I'm not talking about anything. Doug, I don't know. I'm busy with my own life, unfortunately. I know this. The temptation is to live in the flesh, and when I do live in the flesh, the temptation is to justify it, and when I do, I justify flesh, and I weaken others' commitment because they're young and looking and walking and following. And if we're trying to handle them rules and code, they'll take it because that's something they can do in the power of their flesh. But you know what that'll yield? Works of the flesh. It's not life. It's definitely not abundant life. Now, here we go. That brings us all the way up to the contrast, verse 19. Now, the works of the flesh. Because, Stephen, all this stuff, it's just, okay, when you're dumb like me, it's hard to talk about things like walking in the Spirit or walking in the flesh and try to determine the difference. And so I'm so glad Paul, although he dealt with this abstract, now he gives me something I can understand. Brother Mike, he gives me something I can understand, an illustration. And his illustration is simply this. Let me give you a thermometer. Is the characteristics of your life abiding peace, gentleness, patience? Are you approachable? If they're not, you are living in the natural realm. You are in the flesh. Okay, so I need to be more peaceful. I need to be more gentle. I need to be more... No. Prepare to be frustrated and more angry and more manipulating and more power over and more controlling. No. If the characteristic is not peace, gentleness, patience, love, meekness, temperance, then you are walking in the power that you can maintain, can muster. You see, the thermometer, what it's about to do is it's about to expose where I draw my life from, what I define as life. We'll begin to look at this thermometer next Sunday. Brother Doug, close in word of prayer.